On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're breaking down that very dramatic win in the shootout against the New York Rangers. We talk about that. Braydon Point plays the hero once again. We talk about that as well. No surprise here. But first, let's play that music.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I want to thank all of you for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already, please go ahead and like and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow on our YouTube page. Drop a comment below this video. Hit the notification button and give us a thumbs up. Let us know how you feel right now as you're watching this about the, I guess, a win is a win. I'm not going to complain about how it was done. The Lightning have been playing very well throughout the course of December. We had a little bit of a rough patch there against back-to-back losses last week. But at the end of the day, like I said, a win is a win. I'm not going to get too crazy about it. But really, a very blasé game. I think I was talking to a listener during the game, and the word that comes to mind, and the word that I kept saying when I was talking to a few listeners actually, was that I was very underwhelmed by the Lightning's play through the first two periods. Now, they played well in the third. We had the Zibanejad goal there, though, but you know what? It is what it is. Lightning play the Lightning are one of those teams that as the game goes on, their play gets better and better. And, we saw it, in little increments here, but it just felt like a game that, and maybe some of you felt this way too, I just felt like the puck was just ping-ponging its way throughout the entire game. I just felt like there wasn't, one team didn't exactly have a full grasp on the game. I didn't think, and that's sometimes, if that's the case, and we've seen that from time to time, if that's the case, that actually helps the Lightning, or that will help a team. Because let's face it, the Lightning weren't exactly at the top of their game tonight. Let's be honest. Vasilevsky, played well tonight. I thought really what he did well was that he went back to what we saw, and he made 45 saves tonight. And he did a good job of waiting out the storm in increments. But I felt like there wasn't really, and like I said, there was little increments, little sequences here and there where the Rangers looked like they kind of were going to start getting stuff going, but there was never a moment throughout the game where I felt like this was going to be a situation in which the Lightning were going to be forced into a bad, and excuse me there as my AC goes off because it's 1,000,000,000 degrees in my apartment. But getting back to my point, even though Vasilevsky was under heavy pressure throughout this game, 45 shots, 45 saves, 45 of 46. There's nothing to look at and really brush to the side. I still feel like there wasn't a moment or a sequence where I thought that the Lightning were on their back heels. And that kind of goes back to my point about just really not having a team. The Lightning weren't exactly good at puck possession tonight, but where they saved themselves was they did very well in the faceoff circle. They just utterly dominated the Rangers, winning 62% of their faceoffs as opposed to the Rangers 38. Lightning didn't really exactly have a lot of opportunities to get themselves going. They did get off 40 shots, which is great. I mean, but I felt like, and on the other side of that as well, the point I just made about Vasilevsky and how I felt like he wasn't exactly on ice skates. I kind of felt like the same thing too as with Shesterkin with the Rangers side of things. So it was very much a game where I felt like these two teams, it wasn't so much, I think, that they weren't so much not playing well. I just think that both teams were struggling to get really any momentum underneath themselves. And that's why we came to the conclusion that we did in the shootout. The Rangers did have a big opportunity in overtime, picking up a power play, which Victor Hedman kind of lost his cool about that, which, looking at it in real time, and that's how I kind of measure penalties and calls and all that stuff, because that's obviously when it's called, unless it's, a reviewable play, which in this instance it's not. I think that call that was made on the penalty that resulted in the Rangers obviously getting extra man on the ice, which was tripping. I think it was borderline. I think that was a call, and let's face it, the refs were bad tonight. There were some calls that really should have gotten the Lightning way. I'm not one, if you've listened to the show before or watched the show, I'm not the one who's going to sit here and really moan and cry about missed calls here and there, unless, obviously it's playoff game and, the situation's different and it cost the Lightning a series or whatever. And it's no new circumstance where the Lightning are barely getting any penalties. I mean, the other night they got one, tonight they got one. So listen, the refs let them play out there. It's just nothing new for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They have such a hard time drawing penalties. And the fact that it's on home ice, you kind of would have figured that the Lightning, I mean, the officials would have swallowed their whistles in that situation in overtime in a game against two good teams. I said going to this game, I thought the Rangers, were a team where I wasn't exactly afraid of them, and I'm not. They're a good team, but they're not, in my opinion, up there with the Lightning in terms of skill, with talent. But yeah, this was a game where really what I'm trying to get to say is that the Lightning did a very good job of just not getting too frustrated, not going out there and try to do too much, just playing within the ebbs and flows of the game. And they basically waited out the Rangers. They kind of were just like, all right, let's see what you got. And they waited to take their chances, and it paid off with a Braydon Point goal, 5:32 into the third. And so that led to a rather uneventful overtime period, and then somewhat of a eventful. And me, if you've listened to the show, I'm not a fan of the shootout. Really, I just think that maybe you play 2-minute periods or something like that, or I'm not saying here let's go to ties, but there's got to be some sort of better way than shootouts. That's just me. I feel like at that point it's a coin flip. And I don't feel like, especially in a game like this, that, and obviously, believe it or not, I'm saying this because even though the Lightning win, I feel the same way, that I don't think the outcome or the method of the result to get to the result justifies the play. Excuse me. But yeah, then again, I'm going to sit here and wrap it up and say a win is a win. I'm not going to complain. Now you go into Saturday looking to pick up a win, last win of the year of 2022, ended on a high note against a very below mediocre team in the Arizona Coyotes, a team that, though, if you don't show up, could definitely make it a tough matchup, a tough game for you, 100%. And I would be shocked if we see Brian Elliott in that there. But yeah, good win against a mid-level team out of the Metropolitan Division. Good to see Braydon Point score again. We'll talk about him in the second segment in just a bit. But first, I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline.net, one of my favorite. I mean, all our sponsors are my favorite sponsors, but BetOnline. Now, if you've been listening to the show here, or if you've been listening to Locked On NHL, I love sports gambling, and I get my sports gambling fix at BetOnline.net. Now, BetOnline.net gives you the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports betting action. They have just up to date odds. I love them. I love the odds. I love the up-to-date trends, whether it be in-game betting or before. Everything is right updated. They have the best odds you could get anywhere for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball, and most importantly, NHL. They've got it all at betonline.net. They're the fastest, easiest way to get your sports betting info. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts. So once again, I want to thank everybody for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and like and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. You could also subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Drop a comment below underneath the video. Let us know how you feel about this game. Are you walking away from this game feeling good? Or are you kind of just chalking this up to kind of I guess a back-to-back hangover? I already spoke about it on the last episode. How I feel about the Lightning schedule. It is what it is. I'm not going to sit here and complain. It's not like anything can be changed by it anyway. But yeah, I kind of would have figured, or someone, I guess, if you ask any Lightning fan who watched the game from the other night against Montreal, what they thought about this game, I think they probably, all of us would have agreed to a certain extent that this outcome is what we expected. The low-scoring game was not what we expected. Even though you got Vasilevsky and Shesterkin. Shesterkin, listen, has not exactly been his Vezina Trophy self this year. Vasilevsky, first time playing a back-to-back this year. You don't know what you're going to get from him, especially with him, since he hasn't really been his Vezina Trophy winning self either. But coming off a good performance against Montreal, where he didn't really face that many shots, you would have figured that he would have came out and been somewhat dominant. Like I said in the first segment of the show, I thought he played very well. I thought he was solid. Just like in the Montreal game, I thought that he didn't leave himself susceptible to second chances. He played a very conservative, yet, when he needed to be aggressive, game in the crease. So, happy to see that. But obviously the story of the game, if we're talking about individual performances, now this game was won in the shootout by Alex Killorn. But the story of the game continues, and the story behind this team continues to be that of the play of Braydon Point, who, at this point, are we shocked still? Are we shocked? Are we in awe? Are we surprised to a certain extent about how well he has played? Quite honestly, I'm not. I've been a huge fan of him since forever. He's one of those guys, and I've said it before, where if he comes out and plays during the regular season what we have seen him play in the playoffs, he's going to be one of the best players in the league. And I stick by that. I 100% stick by that. And he has really brought that level of play throughout this month of December. Now, to put it in perspective, 11 games played, 9 goals, 1 assist. That's 10 goals. That's 20 on the season. That's 10 points, excuse me. That's 10 points for the month of December. 20 goals on the season. 4 of those goals were game-winning goals throughout this entire month. So the guy is playing phenomenal. And I made the case, and if you didn't watch the last episode, I had this discussion, and I'll continue this discussion. I spoke about how Braydon Point, when he's at the peak of his powers, which quite frankly, not counting the postseason, I think that since we started this show in early 2020, February of 2020, this is the best we have seen Braydon Point play during the regular season. We've seen spurts, we've seen him have stretches where he has gone on a roll, but since this show has started, we have not seen anything like this. And I really start to think, and I spoke about it at the beginning of the season, I really think that this is his year. I really think this is his year where we're going to see him start to take that extra step. And you could see it. And I was watching the game with my dad tonight. He's a big Ranger fan. And I grew up in New York City, so I have a little bit of a still childhood allegiance to the Rangers. And I was telling my dad, and I said, listen, and it was before Braydon Point took his penalty shot. I said, he's playing out of his mind this month of December. And you could tell, and I told him as Point was skating in towards the Shesterkin, he's skating with a ton of confidence right now. And I've said this before, and I will continue to echo this sentiment for forever, because as long as he plays like this, as long as he has the state of mind, Braydon Point is one of the best players in the NHL, definitely the best player on this team. When he is playing with this deadly, dangerous level of confidence that he has been skating with, I mean, there's no limit to what he could do. There's very few players in this league that could really go out there and carry their teams. Players that come to mind: Connor McDavid. We've spoken about him quite a bit on this show. A player that I look at as, if you're in the laboratory trying to make a player who has speed, who has hands, ton of skill, he does play physical, but not to the extent where he sacrifices other elements of his game. If Connor McDavid is you putting all your money and resources into that experiment to make that player, and then you don't have enough money and resources, and you're trying to get at least the next best thing, Braydon Point is the next best thing in terms of that style of play. Now, Nathan MacKinnon, a little bit more physical, a little bit bigger. But Braydon Point, like I said on the last episode, and like I was saying during the game today, when you're looking at the top forwards in the league, there's MacKinnon, there's McDavid. That's 1 and 2. You could interchange those two guys depending on the day of the week, quite frankly. And then you have Matthews at 3. Braydon, I don't think it's a crazy thing anymore to look at Braydon Point, especially now. Now, this might be a little bit of recency bias. He is up to the 20-goal mark. So, he is gaining ground on those top guys in the league, to where you will start to see the numbers speak for themselves. But he is, regardless of that, making a very strong case for him for 4 or 5 in the top 5 of the NHL in forwards. And that's a very impressive thing to do, given all the weapons that this Tampa Bay Lightning team has. You go from Stamkos, you go from Hagel, you go from Nick Paul, you go from Nikita Kucherov. And so when you look at all of that, and the guy that is shining above everybody else, at least over this entire month, is Braydon Point. One's got to, finally give in. The general hockey fan who might be gatekeeping the top 5 in the NHL, you have to look at Braydon Point and give him his credit. And on a night when the Lightning weren't really able to get much done on the ice, 21 was there to at least even things up, to give him another chance to win this game in regulation. And like I said, when Braydon Point, it's not so much with the stats, it's what's the eye test. And thus far, through the 29 days of December, Braydon Point has won the eye test, has passed the eye test every single game. So we're going to wrap things up just a little bit. I do want to talk about more about this game as a whole. I want to talk about, how well, I'm not saying the Lightning played bad in this game. But I don't think they were overly impressive. Given that's saying a lot, considering, the Rangers are a better team than Montreal. But I still would have expected some sort of the same level of play of what we saw against Montreal last night in this game. I know it's the second leg of a back-to-back, but still, this team had basically a week off, so you can't really say that fatigue is an issue. So we'll talk a little bit more about that before we wrap things up. But I just want to remind all of you, it's the holiday season. You're going to parties. You're having a couple of drinks. Some of you may be driving home. So listen, you go to a party. You're hanging with some friends. You're putting back a few drinks. A few becomes too many. And as the evening comes to an end, people start to head out. You think of calling it for a ride. Nah, you live nearby. You can make it home, okay? That's no big deal. But what are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up. You lose your license. You lose your job. You total your car. You kill somebody. Everyone knows about the risk of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So it could happen to anybody. So please go out there and make good decisions. And remember, if you're watching on YouTube, look me in the eyes. Drive sober or get pulled over. This message is brought to you by NHTSA. Drive sober or get pulled over. So wrapping things up, just once again, just touching on the game and actually going to answer a mailbag as well. So let me wrap that up. Let me get that out of the way before I forget. This one comes from my boy Nate Vale. He says, he asked me, what was that the game of the year so far? Now Nate says he thinks it is. Ooh, Nate, and I'm curious what everybody else thinks too as well. Was this the game of the year? We have a lot of games, and I'm going to do something at the end of the season. We're going to kind of rank the top 5 games this year. We haven't done that yet since we've had this show. But was that the game of the year? Honestly, I don't think so. Right now, the game that sticks out to me is the 4-3 win in overtime against Toronto in the third earlier this month. I thought that was a fantastic game. I thought that was a game where the Lightning weren't exactly perfect, but they came out, they played hard. They stuck with Toronto the entire game. And that's the kind of games I look at. And maybe I'm a little biased because that was a division game. But nonetheless, I still think that, that game still sticks out to me. You have a Maple Leafs team who's ahead of you in the division. They get 5-man advantages that night. The Lightning gets 6. The Maple Leafs absolutely dominate the Lightning in the faceoff circle, 61%. You have Mitch Marner in the midst of a 18-game point streak, which he extends that night. And you still come out and you play as a team, and that is something that we've gotten so few games of this year up until that point, and was, we've seen games won by a couple players here and there, but that was one of the few games where I feel thus far this year that this team not only played hard and played against a very, very talented Maple Leafs team who I still think, regardless of the depth of the margin of points that the Leafs have on the Lightning, I still think that they're a very beatable team. I don't look at them as high and mighty Maple Leafs team just yet. Um, but with so many weapons that the Leafs have, alongside with what the Lightning have, and you were starting to see them starting to build up to play better. That point, that was really, I think, the game that started it all in this month. And we saw the Lightning really for one of the first times all year play as a single, so I guess we could say a hive mind, if you want to call it that. Um, and it was very impressive. And I think, this game, tonight's game against the Rangers, they played well. But like I said, I didn't get that same factor as, we're going into this game, we're gonna at least exact our will in certain situations. I didn't see that. Like I said, at the top of the show, that I think that this was just a game where both teams were really struggling to really get anything going, and really it's almost like trying to catch water and hold it in your hands and squeeze your fist. I just felt like every time a team tried to do that with this game and take control, the game would just slip out from with under their hand out of their hands. So Nate, we talk a lot on Twitter. Nate and I, we go back and forth here and there. I gotta disagree with you, buddy. I don't think this is the game of the year thus far. I think that there was a lot of things the Lightning could have done better, and there was a lot less to be desired out of this performance. So, you know what? There's still a ton more games left to be played. So I'm sure we're going to get a ton more game of the year candidates out of this team. They did play well tonight. Like I said, I'm not going to bash them. They still played well. They put themselves within 5 points of Toronto, and 14 away from Boston, which I'm not even going to think about trying to catch Boston right now. Toronto is the goal. But yeah, this game they played well. They played pretty much an entire game without Chernak. They had 5 defensemen. Vasilevsky clearly wasn't exactly on point as he was last night. So it was, if I had to grade this, A being perfect and obviously F being a complete dumpster fire, I would say a C plus. I wasn't, like I said, I'm not overly impressed by this win. A win is a win. Every single point counts, especially in this division. And so, and you give yourself an 8-point cushion again, with Detroit behind you, which I believe they were losing tonight too. I think they were down 5-0 in their game. I think they're playing Nashville. Not too sure about that, but I know they were down 5-0. So that will help the Lightning kind of extend their lead, their point cushion, because you definitely don't want to have Detroit or Buffalo breathing down your neck. As you're looking up towards Toronto, you can't be looking over your shoulder and looking forward. No way to play. But yeah, I thought this was still a good game nonetheless. C plus, good marks all around for the most part. There was one play earlier on in the game. I didn't want to read too much into it. There was basically a loose puck down the other way. It came down to Hedel and Hedman, and Hedman looked like he had the angle, and I know Hedel's a forward, so he's a little bit more speedier than Hedman, but I just feel like in years past, Hedman would have had that. So that kind of just brought back the whole idea is Hedman's clearly been playing through something all season long. I think it's no secret to this point now. What it is, obviously, we won't know. I would assume it's probably something with his legs that is affecting his mobility, but not enough to where it's holding him back from playing games. Just a little bit of a thing to watch out for everybody. Not completely alarmed, but something that could potentially rear its ugly head in the future. So hopefully, Hedman, which I'm sure he is taking advantage of their days off, their non-practice days, getting all the treatment he needs in order to make himself game ready. So good win tonight, though, against a very decently talented team. Lightning win this one out based off of still, I think, veteran experience as well. And they will look towards Arizona on Saturday, 5 o'clock start, at home, last game of 2022. So hopefully they could pull that out. I fully expect them to. I would imagine that Brian Elliott would be in net. I was shocked tonight that Vasilevsky was in net in the second leg of a back-to-back. And I would be very, very shocked if we see him on Saturday. But who knows? Who knows at this point? I think now all bets are off. I think, maybe we'll start to see Cooper start to stretch him out just a little bit, especially after the new year. So we'll keep an eye out for that and talk about it as it comes up. But we'll be back tomorrow to talk about the Coyote game. We'll talk about 2022 as a whole in Bolts Nation. Just a fond look back on the year of 2022 for Tampa Bay Lightning. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you next week.